Hello, everyone, and welcome to this series on founder mental health and well-being. My name is Dr. Mary Meduna Gross, and we have a lineup of conversations coming to you around this topic so that by the end of these 2 weeks of conversation about it, what I want you to know is what is founder mental health and well-being, having that knowing and being confident knowing what that means for you, knowing what resources are available, where to find these resources, whether it's for you or for someone else. This is important. This is life important information. And I'm really honored that Dr. Freeman has agreed to be our first guest for this series, kicking this off so that the conversations that we have from here on out are going to be grounded in research, not just somebody's opinion about what may or may not be a problem, but we have data to support some of these things. And I know there's limitations on research as well, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I'm truly grateful, Dr. Freeman, to start this conversation with you. And so before I jump into you, thank you for being here, by the way. Let you acknowledge that first before I jump into your bio.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So you might be asking yourself, who is Dr. Freeman? So about 10 years ago, mental health being of entrepreneurs was rarely discussed. And as a fourth generation entrepreneur, clinical professor of psychiatry at University of California, San Francisco, and a practicing psychiatrist and executive coach for entrepreneurs, Econa founder Dr. Michael Freeman saw the crucial need to change them. So every day, founders were bringing him stories of stress, burnout, depression, ADHD, bipolar, substance abuse, co founder conflicts, and emotional leadership challenges. So after learning about the suicides of prominent entrepreneurs like Aaron Swartz and Kate Spade, he was inspired to create Econa. Michael, thank you again so much for being here. This is a great way to start off this conversation.
I'm grateful that you're giving some visibility to the issue. It's a very important topic that people don't really appreciate how the impact or the ripple effect of the distress experienced by entrepreneurs, not only for them and their families, but for the entire ecosystem. So I'm pleased to help you succeed here.
Thank you. Thank you. And one of the things that I noticed in your bio is this idea about you yourself are a serial entrepreneur. So not
Yeah.
only you are a researcher and a clinician, but you're also a practitioner. How does that shape not only your business, maybe I could ask that either way, right? How does your experience as a practitioner shape you as a researcher? And how does your experience as a researcher shape you as a practitioner?
So I got interested in the well-being and mental health of entrepreneurs when I was a CEO.
Okay.
I've founded or co-founded 4 or 5 businesses
Okay.
over the years. And in one of them, we were a national company with very broad reach. And we had hundreds of corporate clients. And among the entrepreneurs, among the startups in our customer base, I got to know the CEOs pretty well. And I could just, with my psychiatric training, I could see what was going on. And it was like a phenomenon I had never really heard about before, read about before. So we sold that company, and I went back to UC San Francisco and rounded up some of my research colleagues, and we started to study it. That was in 2015, and we've had a series of studies ever since. We've gotten a lot of really interesting data, and we have a lot of publications in this field.
Yeah.
And entrepreneurs are always liking to build things, and so at this point, we have enough data to know that there's a real problem there, and it's a solvable problem, and how do you solve it at scale? So that's
Okay.
what I'm working on. But it's just direct experience. I had a hypothesis based on personal experience with founders. We tested the hypothesis scientifically, validated that it's true, and now we're continuing to work on it.
So, what was that first hypothesis? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was a little too simplistic. What I thought at the time was that entrepreneurs were more likely to be in the bipolar spectrum, like with little hypomania.
Uh-huh.
That turned out to be true, but it's much more complex than that.
Okay.
That in reality, a number of conditions are overrepresented among entrepreneurs. and a number of personality traits are overrepresented among entrepreneurs. And that, in the end of the day, is the secret sauce. That's why most people can hold a job. Some people can lead a team or an organization, but very few people can start and grow a business. And it's because of those mental health differences. So we've been able to specify what those differences are and what are the superpowers, what are the vulnerabilities, and now we're working on creating a safety net for the vulnerabilities.
Okay. Let's start with the superpowers. I love the sound of that. What have you found the superpowers for entrepreneurs to be?
Energy, motivation, creativity, extroversion, charisma, goal orientation, achievement striving, uh, self efficacy, self confidence, optimism. There's a range of them.
Yeah.
The openness to ideas, a liberal
Mhm.
mindset in the sense of being non-judgmental and being open to getting new input and ideas and information from all over the place, including the guy that you're talking to in line at the grocery store. So those are some of the superpowers, and they also are able to persist, highly persistent, and um, take risks, a higher level of risk propensity than your average bear.
Yeah. As we're talking about this, one of the things that was coming up for me is going through my own doctoral program. I remember the conversation around strengths and weaknesses, and really that our weaknesses are our strengths overdone. And when I'm listening to you
Yeah,
talk about some of those superpowers that we have as entrepreneurs overdone, I could see how a lot of those could trigger our nervous system and keep us in a state of chronic stress if we're chasing or not feeling like we're making the progress that we would like to be making. Is that true, or is that an assumption?
it's partially true.
Mm.
I think a more accurate way to look at it is that there's a spectrum or a continuum between personality traits and mental health symptoms.
Okay.
So if optimism is a personality trait, over optimism becomes a cognitive bias to
Mhm.
the extent that it interferes with your reality testing,
Mhm.
or if risk propensity is a trait that allows you to do experiments and try new things, more extreme levels of risk propensity become recklessness that can blow up on you.
Yeah.
And some of these personality traits at the extreme end actually become mental health conditions.
Mhm.
So that's part of the answer.
Yeah.
And then the other part of the answer is that there are mental health conditions which are associated, like ADHD, for example, is associated with personality traits, but it also has other features that are not personality traits, like hyperactivity and impulsivity.
Mhm.
And these are more um, dimensions of individual differences that are characteristic of entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
Hyperactivity is good. Impulsivity can be good in the sense that you don't have enough time to deeply analyze every choice you make. And so you get enough information and go with what's 80% likely to work.
Mhm.
And 80% of the time you're right.
Mhm.
But again, you can blow yourself up that way as well.
Yeah. Okay, so we have superpowers. Some could be overdone. What have you found in terms of some of the biggest challenges that we're facing as entrepreneurs for our mental health?
There are a lot of them. One interesting challenge that I've been surprised to discover is that a lot of entrepreneurs underneath it all have low self-esteem.
Mhm.
And uh, as I have gotten to know entrepreneurs as people, it in a way it begins to make sense why they have low self-esteem. A lot of entrepreneurs had childhood issues that caused them to be rejected in different ways as kids. If you think about it, these are disruptive people.
Yeah,
And if you're a disruptive kid, you get sent to timeout.
that's right.
But if you're a disruptive young adult, you people give you money to keep disrupting because you're starting something cool.
Right, right.
But you're the same disruptive person. It's the world that sees you negatively at time one and positively at time two. So that's a little confusing for your identity. But kids form their impression of themselves, their identities, or during childhood. And if you keep getting feedback to the effect of, "You're so smart, why can't
Mhm.
you hand your homework in?"
Mhm.
You must be come up with an
Lazy.
adjective. Yeah, lazy
You don't
or
care enough.
conceited or you don't care or you think that it doesn't matter if you let down your team because the world revolves around you, and
Oh,
you get these messages, like, for years and years, and they begin to sink in. So low self-esteem has been a surprising,
yeah.
and interesting discovery, but more common than that is the vulnerability to burnout.
Mhm,
People who become entrepreneurs are goal oriented and
mhm,
they strive
mhm.
to achieve ambitious goals. They have ambitious goals and and that striving can lead to burnout
Yeah,
over time if you forget to take a day off,
yeah.
for example. So,
I would like to dial in on this a little bit
yeah.
because I know that I've experienced the burnout myself. I
Mhm.
experienced burnouts and pursuing my passions and dreams and realized that all along the way, I thought I had to just keep sacrificing myself, right? I was compromising relationships because I had work to do, or I was ignoring my health because it's really not that bad. And besides, who am I going to go to? I don't know if anyone has any answers for me anyway. And so I'm just going to keep pushing through because I've got this other goal that I'm striving on, and that's the goal that makes me feel good, and so I'm just gonna keep working on that. So that's one experience. Another experience that I see come up is when I talk to, my clients around taking time off. I had a conversation with a business broker who was advising really, "Run your business like you have to sell it tomorrow." And part of that meant that you could take time away from your business. And so that this business broker was telling me, Mary, if you can't take a month away from your business, you're not ready to sell it. And so when I bring some of these ideas back to my clients, they're like, why would I want to take a break? I love what I'm doing. It's so rewarding and it's so fulfilling. And I have seen myself fall into that again too. And I've been through burnout, right? I already know what a horrible path this can be. And yet there's that sense of, oh, I love what I'm doing so much. I just want to keep doing more of it. What can you tell us about something like that?
What I can tell you is that for many people who start companies, the motivation was to solve a problem that they had experienced personally. And so the idea of taking a month off doesn't really fit into the self image of having a mission or a purpose in life that you really identify with, that really makes life worth living and that really is your way of contributing
Mhm.
to the world. So coming to grips with that construct is an important part of the evolution
Yeah.
of an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it. The other piece is that people who are attracted into entrepreneurship are often motivated by short-term rewards,
Okay.
and there are a lot of short-term rewards in entrepreneurship. Like every day, somebody makes a comment that validates something about you or your business, and it's rewarding. And so this kind of influx of short-term rewards
Mhm.
can give the work of entrepreneurship a more of like an addictive quality to it.
Okay.
You can become a workaholic.
Yeah.
And then a third element of that is, again, entrepreneurs are different. They have different kinds of minds. Their brains are actually different. There's a neuroscience of entrepreneurship.
Mhm.
And the people in that neuro tribe are often people who are more centered in chaotic situations and conversely are more inclined to experience boredom when things are going too well.
Mhm.
And it's on one hand, you get pulled into entrepreneurship. On the other hand, you want to just not be bored.
Yeah, right.
So being an entrepreneur is a good way to never be bored,
That is that's true.
but it doesn't work. And as you're a coach.
Mm,
As a coach, it's really important to help people understand that the quality of work deteriorates if you don't reset every so often.
mm, yeah.
Um, yeah,
It's our thinking minds from the rules that we both have adopted from our past and the ones that we're holding on to now that says, look, I just need to pour enough into this business now because I want to get out of it. I want to sell this. So I'm willing to compromise everything now to get to that outcome. How does that impact our mental health?
I'm not sure that's always the case. If you ask a lot of entrepreneurs, what's your exit plan?
Mhm.
They'll figure it out.
Okay.
Is more compelling is achieving product market fit, developing, having an impact,
Okay.
as I said. But some entrepreneurs are motivated by, if I only had enough money, then I could actually stop working so hard and go on a couple dates and get into a relationship. That'd be a nice thing to have because I'm already 32 and in the back of my mind, I did want to have a family. And some people, like you said, are just motivated because they want to accumulate wealth.
Yeah.
And so they're driven by that.
Okay.
Response, any way you look at it, is that it's paradoxical, but you're more likely to succeed by hitting the brakes every once in a while and rebooting, taking a day off, spending time with friends, getting out and getting physical exercise, making sure you sleep, having exposure to nature or natural environments. All of those things are very restorative, and then you're more creative and you're more productive at the other side of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm listening to myself and I'm saying, yeah, Michael, I agree with that. I've experienced that myself. And yet, as I was saying before, I can also find myself in the overworking patterns.
Yeah.
Uh,
And you definitely plan to stop smoking after you finish this pack.
That's right. Right. Exactly. Those are some of those things that we tell ourselves.
Mm.
And as we're having this conversation, what's coming up for me is another thing I've heard often in this entrepreneurial world is that entrepreneurship is the most intensive personal development program you'll ever participate in. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't know where parenthood fits on that
Oh,
list. I think parenthood is pretty
that was
good for
another one.
personal development. Yeah,
Yeah,
it can be if you open yourself to the experience.
I think so. Because, and I will just say from my experience, in entrepreneurship, versus having a job. When I had a job, I could hide, right? If I wasn't completely confident or if I had some of those I'm not quite worthy kinds of things, I could hide that. I
Yeah.
could do the right things as I did. I could do the right things and just hope that nobody ever noticed really what was going on here. But when
Mhm.
I got into entrepreneurship, there's no place to hide anymore. And
Correct.
that felt really vulnerable to me. I got a lot to offer here, but wow, this feels very exposing, and it took me some time to really come to peace with that.
Yeah, it is, you are quite exposed.
Mm,
The marketplace is judging you every single day,
yes.
and either you're getting traction or you're not.
Yeah.
And if you're not getting traction, it has to do with you and your read of the signals from the marketplace or
Yes.
your capacity to build social capital or take advantage of opportunities or recognize opportunities. And most entrepreneurs fail. That's the
Mhm.
other thing.
Yeah.
In spite of the optimism and confidence, most entrepreneurs fail.
How does that experience have you done research around that? So for an entrepreneur who's poured everything into it and they failed, what is the impact on their mental health and well-being at that point?
Different for different entrepreneurs, but
Sure.
on average, not good.
Okay.
And particularly if you get to the point of building a company that's big enough to go bankrupt,
Uh-huh.
that is devastating
Okay.
for years, can be devastating for years.
Wow. So this
And it
is
happens quite frequently, and there's no mental health safety net for entrepreneurs. And that's what inspires me to do what I'm doing because we need to have a safety net, and it can be built.
Yeah. So one other piece from your article about was it what was give me the name of it again? Are entrepreneurs touched with fire? And you talk about 72% of the entrepreneurs in the sample reported mental health concerns. And you said that was higher than a comparison group. Could you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Yes, and we've done a number of studies since then, and I prefer to use data from different studies
Okay.
because that particular study that you're referencing had a small sample. We've done studies with much bigger samples. And by sample, what I mean is that we've had more entrepreneurs participate and we've used better methods.
Okay.
But it turns out that 40%, roughly 38% of entrepreneurs have one or more diagnosable mental health conditions like ADHD,
Mhm.
anxiety, depression, addiction,
Mhm.
bipolar, you name it. And what we discovered in that first study that you talked about is that even if you don't have any mental health issues, your first degree relatives, parents, siblings, and children are more likely to have mental health issues than the family members of people who are not entrepreneurs. And that's because these traits that can be positive are also associated with mental health issues. And
Mhm.
frequently, somebody else in the family is the one who has been hospitalized for some mental health issue. And you're the one that gets the energy and the creativity and the brainstorms that keep coming and the ability to influence other people to build stuff and grow things. And it's a different part of the same condition. It's just for you, it's subthreshold, and for your sibling, it was full blown. And they were so the families of mental health of entrepreneurs tend to have more mental health issues, and entrepreneurs tend to have their own mental health issues and a
Yeah.
specific kind of set of them.
Okay. So we know that this is real. The
Mm.
72%, is that a rough is that a good estimate to say that roughly
What the
3
number that I was just citing, I think,
you know
if I were designing in one of the so I mentioned that I was an entrepreneur.
yeah,
I used to start health insurance companies, be
okay,
like the founding chief medical officer,
okay,
for example. That was one of the things that I did. So if you're in health insurance, you're taking risk. You have to predict what the utilization of healthcare services is going to be. So if I were making a health insurance company for entrepreneurs, I would predict that it's about 40% have diagnosable mental health issues. And when you say that 70% are affected, it's because of they're affected by growing up in families in which other people were mentally ill.
okay,
You're an entrepreneur and your mom was severely depressed for many years,
yeah,
or your dad was an alcoholic or something like that.
right, right. I hear so many of those stories. I didn't
Mhm.
realize that there was some connection between all of those stories and our propensity to become entrepreneurs.
Yes, that's the
Yeah,
whole point.
yeah,
Yeah, that in many cases, the entrepreneurs are the ambassadors of the positive mental health traits that allow people to succeed. So these mental health differences are here for a reason. It has adaptive advantage.
yeah,
Mental illness, if you want to think of it in that framework, which I usually don't, but it's a little comparable to sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease is common among sub-Saharan African people because if you have sickle trait, it gives you resistance to malaria.
huh,
But if you have sickle disease, if you have sickle trait, you inherit from one parent.
yeah,
If you inherit the trait from both parents, then you have sickle disease and you're going to die young, and it's not pretty.
okay,
So the mental health traits are adaptive and they confer these superpowers. But if you get too many of these mental health traits all packaged up in one genome, you could have problems associated with severe and persistent mental illness.
Okay. At the top of this conversation, you said this was a solvable problem.
Hmm.
How do you see this problem being addressed now?
Now,
Mhm.
the main right now, the most progressive thing that's happening with respect to this problem is reducing shame and stigma.
Okay.
So right now, it's just about destigmatization. That's very much that's what happens before the beginning of the journey
Mm.
of solving the problem.
Okay.
Before you can start to solve the problem, you have to acknowledge that there is a problem, which is hard to do if you're inhibited by stigma. So
Mm.
right now, we just need to focus on destigmatization.
Okay. And
If you get beyond that, then it's it's not that hard to do because mental health conditions are treatable. There's a
Mhm.
lot of great evidence-based care for most mental health conditions
Mhm.
with really good outcomes. Outcomes for mental health are better than outcomes for most other categories of healthcare conditions.
Are there any qualities of this care that make one kind of care more effective than another for mental health?
Evidence-based. The
Okay.
problem with mental health care is a lot of people do a lot of people are not focused on evidence-based treatment.
Yeah.
And if you this was one of the issues that this is an issue that plagues mental health. If you are depressed and you talk to 5 mental health clinicians, then you're gonna find out 5 different theories about why you're depressed,
Yeah.
and probably 4 of them are wrong. I think it's critically important that if any clinicians are going to extend themselves to entrepreneurs to provide mental health care, that you really need to focus on evidence-based care. And they not only focus on that as a treatment protocol, but be able to explain it in an articulate way, so that founders understand why you're making the recommendations that you're making. Yeah.
Yeah. Help them make informed decisions.
Yeah. And then for the coaches, coaches make a million mistakes because they don't understand what they're looking at.
Mhm.
An easy example is that there's a very significant prevalence of ADHD among entrepreneurs.
Mhm.
And some of the entrepreneurs who get the best results have ADHD
Mhm.
because some of those traits are effective.
Right.
But coaches can focus on issues like interrupting and overriding team members and being late and um, having anger management issues
Mhm.
and getting inability to tolerate frustration. And they can give coaching suggestions that are going to be pretty useless because unless you understand that all of those things I just said
Mhm.
are manifestations of ADHD, and if you don't deal with the underlying issue, you're not going to be able to
Yeah.
change the elements that affect your performance
Mhm.
as a leader, as a CEO.
Okay. So we know that this is a real issue. We have the
Hmm.
data to support that. We know that it's solvable. But you had mentioned that one of the biggest barriers is just the stigma about mental health.
Hmm.
And in fact, I mentioned this to you before we hit go on record today that I was speaking with there are venture capital firms and there will be some in this series that we will be speaking to that have recognized the importance of founder well-being and set aside percentage of their packages that are to be used exclusively for that founder's mental health and well-being. And there's oftentimes, at least in my experience, very few restrictions on how one can use them. But when I was speaking with a representative from a firm, and I will not name any names, but this firm is committed to their founders and set aside this fund for their founders. And she said, Mary, only 60% of our clients ever even touch that money. which means I'm assuming I was shocked. I didn't ask follow-up questions, so I don't have a good follow-up to this, but to me, it was so that means 40% aren't touching it. Now 60%, she said they're touching it, but are they even using all of it? So we've got this stigma. We know it's solvable. We have the stigma. How do we help people connect the dots here?
So I wouldn't assume that number is reflects stigma only.
Okay.
First of all, in our study, what we found was that 60% of entrepreneurs don't have any issues. They're fine.
Okay.
So it's not every single yes, every single entrepreneur experiences stress.
Sure.
And I'm sure all entrepreneurs would benefit from stress management, learning stress management skills and
Sure.
emotion regulation and mindfulness and things like that.
Yeah.
But not everybody needs it. Then the other question I would ask is, does it have to do with the nature of the offer, or does it have to do with any blockers that or friction that entrepreneurs might experience accessing the resources?
Mhm.
So I'd have to look at it a little bit more carefully, but I can say that this particular VC firm that you're talking about is doing a really great thing. Most investors don't particularly
Mhm.
put resources into well-being of their founders, and so any if you're an entrepreneur listening to this and you're doing a raise, if you find VC firms that think founder well-being should be a priority, I would give them a closer look in your
Yes.
next funding round.
And just even knowing that's out there, that's possible, that there
Yeah,
are investors who really are willing to invest in the founders themselves, not just their business.
yes. But there is a lot that can also be done to destigmatize well-being
Okay.
and mental health in particular among entrepreneurs. And I think from the point of view of the investors, be transparent about your own issues,
Mhm.
and also create a culture in which it's expected that uh, people will ride the emotional roller coaster, and it's not an easy roller coaster to be on, and that the ups can be as dangerous as the downs, and that most people who do experience symptoms will experience symptoms for which there's a right way to address it.
Sure.
So that good, positive outcomes are there.
Great. And I appreciate coming back to that as well, right? So not only is this solvable, but we have positive outcomes that are coming from the therapies and treatments that are being used now.
Yes. And of equal importance, many of these more intrusive symptoms can be prevented in the first place
Exactly.
if you take a more of a like a prevention orientation, if you're
Mhm.
proactive, and if you do the things that increase your ability to tolerate stress,
Yeah.
like I mentioned before, social support and sleep and exercise and good nutrition, nature exposure,
Sure.
you reduce the likelihood that you'll experience mental health problems down the road
Yeah.
if that becomes a way of life.
Yeah. I remember, so I worked in special education and I got my master's degree in counseling because of so many of my kids I was working with had severe emotional issues. And so I wanted to understand the world that they were operating out of, this mental health world. And so that's why I got my master's degree in counseling so that I could understand that. And it is a whole new world. I really admire those individuals that take on that work of addressing their mental health and being because it is a
Hmm.
commitment. It is a huge commitment, and yet without making that commitment, outcomes just are miserable, I think is a fair way of saying that. Is that true?
Can be,
Can be.
can, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what are some of the research projects Econa is working on now?
We're only working on one, and it's a
Okay.
large one with UC Berkeley.
Okay.
And we are trying to study and understand the relationship between well-being and thriving among founders and business outcomes,
Mhm.
and at the same time create a um, quick way of getting a blood pressure check
Yeah.
to determine how much distress an individual entrepreneur might be experiencing, and
Mm.
then we provide like trying to provide immediate support, media resources.
Excellent. So
Yeah,
if someone was curious about learning more about Econa, we'll have the web address. Is that the best place to go to?
to learn about Econa, yes, but
Yeah.
if you are listening to this podcast and you're an investor or an entrepreneur that would like to participate in research to advance being in mental health of entrepreneurs, just write me an email and
Okay.
I'll send you more
Okay.
information.
Perfect. Perfect. We'll definitely have your email, Michael, in the show notes for this. We'll
Okay.
make that very prominent so it's
Hmm.
easy for people to get a
Yeah.
hold of you.
Or you can find me on LinkedIn.
Sure.
Send me a
We'll
LinkedIn
have
note.
your LinkedIn link there as well. We
Hmm.
wanna make it very easy for people to find you. As we wrap up, I time got away from me. I can't believe that we've been here for so long already. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think we overlooked?
I know you're going to talk with a lot of other stakeholders in the innovation ecosystem in this series. So I think that's
Yes.
great. And that if people listen to different voices, my voice is a serial entrepreneur who got into doing research about well-being and mental health.
Mm.
But I don't have a monopoly on the truth here. So
Right.
you will be learning things from an investor and from an entrepreneur and from the romantic partner of the entrepreneur. It's all part of a jigsaw puzzle that you understand when you zoom out.
Absolutely.
But I think to close, I would say that it is true that we found in our studies that about 3% of entrepreneurs have already made suicide attempts and 1.7% have already had a psychiatric hospitalization. So if you're an entrepreneur feeling distress, don't keep it to yourself. Just
Mhm.
ask somebody for help. Tell someone you love, tell your primary care physician. If other entrepreneurs, ask them what they've done, but get support
Absolutely.
because necessary to really suffer
Right.
to that extent.
I think that's a beautiful way to close. Thank you
Hmm.
so much for sharing your insights and your experiences with us today, Michael.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you for um, trying to create more awareness about how important this actually is.